What if I told you that the woman who threw a pregnant girl out onto the streets would one day have to beg that same woman for mercy? What if the mansion she protected so fiercely would become the very place where she'd face her ultimate downfall? This isn't just another story about karma. This is about a young woman named Fiona who turned her greatest humiliation into her most powerful weapon. And when she finally returned, she didn't just want revenge. She wanted everything. Before we continue, have you subscribed yet? Hit that button for more interesting stories and mark the register by commenting which country you're watching from. Today's shout out goes to all my current subscribers. Thank you for watching my videos and subscribing to my channel. It keeps me going. Now strap in. This story's about to hit harder than you expect. Fiona Martinez clutched her growing belly as she stood on the marble steps of the Whitmore estate, her suitcase beside her, and tears streaming down her face. At 22 and 6 months pregnant, she never imagined this would be how her fairy tale marriage would end. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave," Quintessa Whitmore had said just 30 minutes earlier, her cold blue eyes showing no trace of sympathy. "My son deserves better than some gold-digging waitress who trapped him with a pregnancy." Joseph, her husband of 8 months, had stood there like a statue, unable to meet Fiona's desperate gaze. His mother's iron grip on the family fortune had always controlled him, but Fiona never thought he'd choose money over his own wife and unborn child. The Whitmore family had built their empire through 3 generations of real estate development and investments. Their mansion sat on 50 acres of prime California land worth millions. Joseph was set to inherit everything, but only if he followed his mother's rules, and rule number 1 was crystal clear. Fiona had to go. "Joseph, please," Fiona had begged, reaching for his hand. "Tell her about the baby. Tell her we love each other." But Joseph had pulled away, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Fiona. I can't lose everything. My mother, she'll cut me off completely." Quintessa had smiled then, a cruel twist of her perfectly painted lips. "The marriage was a mistake, dear. Young men make foolish choices, but this family has a reputation to maintain." As Fiona walked away from the only stability she'd known since aging out of foster care, she had nothing but $347 in her bank account and a baby growing inside her. She'd worked as a waitress at an upscale restaurant where she'd met Joseph, and she'd been so careful to save every penny. But now, pregnant and alone, those savings wouldn't last long. She found a tiny studio apartment in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where sirens wailed every night and the landlord demanded cash up front. The walls were thin, the heat barely worked, and Fiona spent her days applying for jobs that wouldn't hire a pregnant woman, and her nights crying herself to sleep. Kevin Rodriguez lived in the apartment next door. He was a night shift security guard at a downtown office building, putting himself through business school 1 class at a time. He'd hear Fiona crying through the walls and sometimes left groceries by her door with notes that said, "From a friend." "You don't have to do this," Fiona told him one evening when she caught him leaving a bag of prenatal vitamins outside her door. Kevin shrugged, his kind brown eyes filled with understanding. "My mom was a single mother. I know how hard it gets." 3 months later, when Fiona went into labor alone, it was Kevin who drove her to the hospital in his beat-up Honda. He held her hand through the contractions when no one else was there. Baby Emma was born healthy, but the hospital bills were crushing. Fiona worked 3 part-time jobs: cleaning offices at night, data entry during Emma's naps, and weekend catering gigs. Kevin helped whenever he could, becoming like a big brother to both Fiona and Emma. "You're too smart to be stuck like this forever," Kevin told her one night as they shared instant ramen while Emma slept in her crib. "I've been watching you handle those catering budgets. You have a head for numbers." Kevin was right. Despite never having gone to college, Fiona had always been naturally gifted with math and organization. She could look at a business's finances and spot inefficiencies within minutes. When Kevin started his own small security company after graduation, Fiona became his unofficial business manager. "I can't pay you much yet," Kevin apologized, "but I can give you 20% of the profits and flexible hours." "Kevin, you don't understand," Fiona said, looking at the business plan she'd helped him create. "This isn't just going to work. This is going to be huge." She was right. Within 2 years, Rodriguez Security had landed contracts with major office buildings and retail chains throughout the city. Fiona's strategic planning and Kevin's honest work ethic made them an unstoppable team. But Fiona had bigger dreams. "I want to buy the buildings, not just guard them," Fiona told Kevin on Emma's 3rd birthday. She'd been studying real estate law at night, devouring every book she could find about property investment and development. Kevin laughed, but not mockingly. He'd learned to take Fiona's ambitious ideas seriously. "With what money?" "With the money we're going to make flipping houses." Fiona had been driving through foreclosure options for months, learning the market, understanding which properties had hidden value. She convinced Kevin to partner with her on their first flip, a rundown Victorian in an up-and-coming neighborhood. They bought it for $89,000 with every penny they could scrape together. Fiona managed the renovation while Kevin handled the security business. She taught herself about permits, contractors, and design trends. 6 months later, they sold it for $167,000. "Again," Fiona said simply. By Emma's 5th birthday, Fiona and Kevin owned 12 rental properties and had flipped over 30 houses. Fiona had earned her real estate license and started studying for her broker's exam. She was relentless, driven by memories of sleeping on a mattress on the floor while pregnant and alone. But she never forgot who put her there. Late one night, while researching property records for a potential investment, Fiona stumbled across something interesting. The Whitmore estate, worth an estimated $15 million, had some unusual financial activity in recent years. "Kevin, look at this," she called him over to her laptop. "Joseph's been taking out loans against the property, big ones." She dug deeper, using her network of real estate contacts and public records. What she found was shocking. Joseph had developed a serious gambling problem after their divorce. He'd been hemorrhaging money at casinos and underground card games for years. Quintessa had been liquidating investments and selling off smaller properties to keep them afloat. But it wasn't enough. "The estate goes up for auction in 6 months, Fiona told Kevin, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Kevin, what are you thinking?" She turned to him with a smile that would have made Quintessa Whitmore very nervous. "I'm thinking it's time to go home." Fiona spent the next 6 months preparing like a general planning a siege. She liquidated properties, called in favors, and secured financing from banks who now saw her as a serious player in the real estate market. Kevin tried to talk her out of it at first. "This isn't about the money anymore, is it?" he asked one evening as Fiona pored over financial documents. "It was never about the money," Fiona replied quietly. "It's about Emma. It's about making sure she never has to beg anyone for anything." 8-year-old Emma was thriving. She attended a good private school, took piano lessons, and had never known the fear and uncertainty that had defined Fiona's early motherhood. But Fiona wanted more for her daughter. She wanted her to understand that people who hurt you don't get to walk away without consequences. The foreclosure auction was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the courthouse. Fiona had done her homework. She knew exactly how much the property was worth, how much the Whitmores owed, and how much she needed to bid to win. She also knew that Quintessa and Joseph would be there, watching their family legacy get sold to the highest bidder. Fiona wore a tailored navy suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who belonged in rooms where millions of dollars changed hands. Emma sat beside her, dressed like the little lady she was becoming, her dark hair in neat braids. When Quintessa and Joseph walked into the courthouse, Quintessa looked older, more fragile than Fiona remembered. Her once perfect appearance was showing cracks. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the stress lines, and her designer handbag was from several seasons ago. Joseph looked worse. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his hands shook slightly. They didn't recognize Fiona at first. The scared, pregnant girl they'd thrown out had been replaced by a poised businesswoman who commanded attention when she entered a room. The auctioneer called the proceedings to order. "We're here today for the foreclosure sale of the Whitmore estate, consisting of the main residence and 50 acres of land in Malibu, California." Bidding started at $8 million. Several developers and investors raised their paddles, driving the price up steadily. Quintessa watched in horror as strangers casually bid on her family's legacy. At $11.5 million, most of the bidders dropped out. Only 3 remained: a commercial developer, an investment firm, and Fiona. $12 million, called the developer. $12.5, countered the investment firm. Fiona raised her paddle. $13 million. That's when Joseph's eyes widened in recognition. He grabbed his mother's arm and whispered frantically in his ear. Quintessa's face went white as she turned to stare at the woman who had once cowered before her. $13.2, bid the developer, but his voice lacked conviction. $13.5, Fiona said calmly, never breaking eye contact with Quintessa. The other bidders fell silent. $13.5 million was already above market value for a property with so many liens against it. Going once, going twice, sold to bidder number 47 for $13.5 million. Outside the courthouse, Quintessa and Joseph intercepted Fiona as she walked to her car with Emma. "You," Quintessa said, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "You did this on purpose." Fiona smiled, the same composed expression she'd worn throughout the auction. "Hello, Quintessa. Joseph, I'd like you to meet your granddaughter, Emma." Joseph's face crumbled as he looked at the little girl who had his same dark eyes and strong jawline. "Fiona, I'm so sorry. I never meant for things to—" "To what?" Fiona interrupted. "To leave your pregnant wife homeless? To choose money over your own child? To gamble away your family's fortune while that child grew up without knowing her father?" Quintessa stepped forward, her old arrogance flaring despite her desperate situation. "You can't do this. That house has been in our family for 60 years. "And now it's in mine," Fiona replied smoothly. "Don't worry, though. I'm not unreasonable. You can stay in the guest house for a monthly rent of $8,000. $8,000? Joseph sputtered. "We don't have that kind of money." "Then I suggest you find jobs. I hear there are some good restaurants in town looking for servers. I could put in a word for you." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Quintessa, who had once sneered at Fiona for being just a waitress, was now being offered the same work as Charity. Fiona moved into the Whitmore estate 3 weeks later. She had the master bedroom redecorated in soft blues and whites, erasing every trace of Quintessa's gaudy fixtures. Emma got the room she'd always dreamed of, complete with a reading nook and a view of the ocean. Kevin visited often, bringing his own family. He'd married Maria, a teacher he'd met at night school, and they had twin boys. The house that had once been cold and unwelcoming became filled with laughter and warmth. Joseph tried several times to reach out, to build a relationship with Emma. Fiona allowed supervised visits, not out of forgiveness, but because Emma deserved to know her father, even if he was a disappointment. "Why did you leave us?" Emma asked him during one of these visits, her 8-year-old directness cutting through years of excuses. Joseph struggled to find words that wouldn't destroy what little dignity he had left. "I was scared," he finally admitted. "I was a coward, and I made the worst decision of my life." Quintessa, meanwhile, had taken a job at a local department store. The woman who had once commanded a staff of household employees now folded clothes and dealt with difficult customers for minimum wage. She aged rapidly, the stress and humiliation taking their toll. 2 years after the auction, Quintessa developed serious health problems. Her insurance from the department store job was minimal, and the medical bills were mounting. She swallowed her pride and came to Fiona. "I know I don't deserve your help," she said, standing in the foyer of what had once been her own home, "but I'm asking anyway." Fiona studied the woman who had once held all the power, who had thrown her out without a second thought. Quintessa looked fragile now, worn down by the consequences of her own cruelty. "You're right," Fiona said finally. "You don't deserve my help." Quintessa's shoulders sagged in defeat. "But Emma does deserve to know her grandmother," Fiona continued, "and I won't let you pass away alone and bitter, no matter what you did to me." Fiona paid for Quintessa's medical treatment, but she made sure the older woman understood the terms. "You will never, ever speak badly about me in front of Emma. You will never try to turn her against me, and you will never forget that everything you have now exists because I chose mercy over revenge." 5 years later, Emma was 13 and thriving. She excelled in school, played violin in the youth orchestra, and had developed a sharp business sense that impressed even Kevin. "I want to expand the business," Emma told Fiona one evening as they walked through their property. "We should buy more land, build sustainable housing developments." Fiona smiled, proud of the confident young woman her daughter was becoming. "And what makes you think that's a good investment?" "Because people need homes they can afford, and because it's the right thing to do," Emma replied matter-of-factly. Joseph had managed to get his gambling under control and now worked as a manager at one of Kevin's security offices. He wasn't wealthy, but he was stable, and he'd become a decent, if distant, father to Emma. He paid child support religiously and never missed one of Emma's recitals. Quintessa lived in a small apartment downtown. Her health stabilized, but her spirit forever changed. She saw Emma once a week for lunch, carefully following Fiona's rules. Sometimes, in unguarded moments, Fiona caught glimpses of genuine affection between grandmother and daughter. The Whitmore estate had been transformed into something new, not just a display of wealth, but a real home where a family had grown and thrived. Fiona had kept some of the original architecture, but added warmth and character that reflected her own journey. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, as Fiona sat in her home office reviewing business plans for their latest development project, Emma knocked on the door. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? Buying this house, I mean. Making them lose everything?" Fiona set down her pen and looked at her daughter, really looked at her. Emma had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate young woman, despite witnessing the complex dynamics of their family situation. "I regret that it was necessary," Fiona said carefully. "I regret that your father chose money over family. I regret that your grandmother valued status more than kindness. But do I regret protecting us? Do I regret making sure you'd never have to depend on anyone for anything? Never." "But we could have just succeeded without all this drama," Emma pointed out. "We were already doing well." Fiona nodded. "You're right. We could have built our empire somewhere else and never looked back. But sometimes, Emma, people need to face the consequences of their choices, not for revenge, but for justice. And sometimes the people who hurt you need to understand exactly what they took from you." Emma considered this, her young face serious. "And now? Now we focus on building something better. Your grandmother learned what it means to lose everything. Your father learned what it costs to abandon your family. And you learned that you never have to accept being treated as less than your worth." 10 years after the auction, Fiona received an unexpected visitor. A young woman, maybe 25, stood at her door with the baby in her arms and desperation in her eyes. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" the woman said. Fiona had taken Kevin's last name when they became business partners, finding it easier than explaining her complicated history. "Yes? My name is Sarah Chen. I work at the women's shelter downtown. I heard you might understand what it's like to be thrown out with nowhere to go." Fiona invited Sarah in, listening as the young woman told her story, almost identical to Fiona's own. A wealthy family, a weak husband, a pregnancy that threatened their perfect image. "I have a business degree," Sarah said, bouncing her fussy baby. "I managed their family's investments for 3 years, but they act like I'm nothing, like I contributed nothing." Fiona saw herself 15 years ago in this young woman's eyes, but she also saw something else: potential, intelligence, and a determination that hadn't been broken yet. "I can't promise to solve all your problems," Fiona told Sarah, "but I can promise you this. If you're willing to work, if you're willing to learn, and if you're willing to wait for your moment, it will come." Sarah became Fiona's protege, learning the real estate business and eventually managing several of their property developments. She never got revenge on her ex-husband's family. She didn't need to. She built something bigger and better on her own terms. Today, the Rodriguez Development Company is worth over $50 million. Emma, now 23, runs the sustainable housing division while finishing her MBA. Kevin and Maria have expanded the security business into private investigation and corporate consulting. Joseph works for the company now, having proven himself reliable and hardworking over the years. He's not wealthy, but he's found peace in honest work and a relationship with his daughter built on respect rather than obligation. Quintessa passed away peacefully 2 years ago. In her final months, she and Fiona had developed something that wasn't quite friendship, but wasn't hostility either. A mutual understanding between two women who had both learned hard lessons about power and family. At the funeral, Quintessa's old friends whispered about how strange it was that Fiona had paid for everything, had been so generous to the woman who had once thrown her out. They didn't understand that Fiona's generosity wasn't about forgiveness. It was about showing Emma that strength doesn't require cruelty. Fiona still lives in the Whitmere estate, but it's not a shrine to her victory over the family that rejected her. It's simply home, the place where she raised her daughter, built her business, and learned that the best revenge isn't destruction. It's success. The scared pregnant girl who was thrown out on the street became a woman who never had to ask anyone for anything ever again. She didn't just win, she built an empire that would protect her daughter and her daughter's children for generations to come. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when Emma practices violin in the music room, Fiona sits on the terrace overlooking the Pacific and remembers that desperate night when she had nothing but $347 and a dream of something better. She got something better. She got everything. But more importantly, she made sure Emma would never have to fight for what she deserved. And in the end, that was the only victory that truly mattered. Thank you so much for listening all the way through. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about this story? Until next time, check out other stories on my channel. I love you for real. Bye.